In this video, I wanted to show how to quickly and easily build a scene like this in a free and open source software called Tooll. You can either just sit back and relax and just watch, or join in to get some hands-on experience. This is the prepared scene that I wanted to build today. Before I start, let's briefly analyze what it consists of and how the scene works. Starting at the far left of the scene graph, we find the following nodes. For this, I'm going to pin the group so that we can see the actual geometry that it consists of. And in this case, I'm going to turn everything off. And let's start at the top. We have just a sphere. Next up, we have a torus that gets repeated at mesh points. Actually, I've used grid points for this. Then we have points on a sphere surrounding the sphere at the top, which are simply just points on sphere. At the bottom we have more points which are just in the background. Then I have added 2 point lights. The first one is actually in the sphere at the very center of the whole thing. Then I have another one which gives some blue illumination to light up the scene a bit more. Then I have added a camera which rotates around the whole scene. The rest of the nodes is just post-processing, starting with render target, which adds multi-sampling, anti-aliasing. We have some depth of field, a glow, which is really important for this. Then we have a little bit of color grade, adding some grain, which is not really important, and I'm not sure if you can see it through the codec, and some chromatic distortion. So now that we know what we need to build, let's get started. For this, we'll just find a free area and start by pressing Tab. And I'm going to start with the sphere. So I'm going to type sphere and going to add a draw mesh so that we can actually see something. I am going to pin this and make it a bit smaller, 0.1. And next up, we want to add the torus. So I'm going to type torus. Also have a draw mesh so that we can actually see what it looks like. And this is definitely still too thick. So I'm going to put in a 0.1, but I think this is too thin. So I'm going to turn it into a 0.03. So now we want to see both in combination, so I'm going to add a group just to see how they relate to each other, and I think this looks like a good size for both of them. So now I'm going to add points in the center where we can duplicate the torus to. So for this, I'm going to add grid points, and I'm going to lock this, pin this, add grid points, and as we can see, if we take a look at these points, it's a lot of points and they're all spread out. I want it to be less points and they also need to be in a smaller area, so I'm gonna change the scale, and since we want less, I'm gonna type in 3 times 3. So now what we want to do is we want to make the torus replicate or duplicate them on every single grid point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type mesh and point, and we have repeat mesh at points. So I'm going to put this in, and the points that we need 2 inputs. The points are here and the mesh is here. And then we also want to see this. So we draw the mesh, we put it here. We don't need this, we don't need this. And we can see that there are a lot of meshes here, but they're all the same position. So what we want is we want to have them all have different sizes. So we're going to randomize the size by adding a randomize points node behind the grid points, and then just turn up the randomize W, which changes the size. And then what we also want to do is we want them to rotate. So we put in a, oh, that's the position. So we're going to put this in the rotation, 360, 360, 360. So now we can see we're getting closer. So Next up, I'd say that the torus is still a bit too thick. So I'm going to pin the group. It's already pinned. So I'm going to turn this down a little bit to 2.3. Maybe even smaller, like a 0.15. That looks good. Next up, I think the sphere is a bit too small, so I'm going to make it twice as big. And next up, we want to add a material to the sphere. The default material looks like this, but of course we want it to be a glowing orange. So I'm going to turn this into orange. The emissive color, we're going to turn this to a bright orange. And since we want this to be really, really bright, we're going to turn up the luminance and type in a 10 here. So now it's really bright. The material for the torus should be something like a metal material. We turn the roughness down a little bit and turn up the metal. Then we're going to add the points on the sphere right here. So we type in points and sphere, points on sphere. And we would like to see the points. So we draw them and we add them to the group, and we can already see the points are here. I'm going to turn up the number to 1000. Maybe I would like to decrease the radius a little bit. I think this looks good. The perfect sphere is a bit boring, so I'm also going to add in a randomize node here, randomize points, and change the size a little bit, and then add to the position just a 0.1 to everything and turn this down a little bit so that you can still see it's a sphere, but it's not as perfect. And we also want their color to be a bright orange, maybe even with a little bit of luminance. Next up, we have the points in the background. For this, I'm just going to use the same points again and add a randomize points node, and again a draw points, and add this to our group as well. Now we have them at the same position, and we want them to be spread out through the scene. So we're going to find out, okay, 5 seems to be a good number, so we're putting a 5 into all the dimensions, x, y, and z. And now the geometry, or all the elements that we wanted to have, are already here. So next up is the point light. So I'm going to add a point light. This one is in the center of the scene already. So I'm going to leave the position like this. And just to make sure that it works, we're going to put the intensity really high. And we can see it works. Now I would like to turn up the decay so that it doesn't really affect the outer rings. Going to turn up the decay a little bit more. Maybe to something like 6. And then turn down the intensity to 5. And make this also a bright orange, yellowish tone. Next up, we have to add another point light. And this one, I'm going to take this and just move it to the far left and turn this into the opposite color, maybe something like this. And then also turn up the intensity to see how it affects the scene. Works quite good. And turn that down a little bit, back to 5 or 10. Next up, we want to add the camera. So I'm going to type in orbit camera. And I think the distance and the speed already looks really good. Maybe you want it to be closer. Maybe you want it to be further away. I think I'm going to go for this distance. And next up, we want to render the scene. So we have render target. And then we had depth of field. Gonna add this. And now I don't really like that these are so bright. I want the focus of the image to be in the center. So I'm going to turn down the brightness of the material that's on the torus. Going to pin the depth of field and turn down the brightness by making it darker. You can also add some color if you like, but I think staying neutral looks the best. Next up, I'm going to add a glow to add the high dynamic range and turn down the amount a little bit more. And next up, we have some grade, color grade. So now we can decide what look we're going for. I kind of like this look actually. So I'm gonna turn up, whoops. Of course I have to pin this. And I'm gonna turn up the brightness of this. Of this point light, and maybe even the one from this. Yeah, that looks better. And then we also want to be able to see these points, so I'm gonna make the luminance a bit higher. And then go back to the color grade to see if we find a look that we like. Or we could also just do it by hand. And finally, the last two things that we had in the original scene is just a grain. I usually turn this amount up a little bit to see. Now you can see it's quite static. Not sure if the capture actually captures this, but I usually turn the speed to 55 and then the amount so that you can barely notice it, but not really necessary. And then sometimes I would like to add chromatic distortion, which is usually way too high, so I turn down the size to 0.025 and then also turn down the colorize, because otherwise you get this greenish tint. And now we're almost done. The last thing that's missing is that the points on the sphere, that they are turning randomly, so we're gonna find those. And we want to rotate them, so I am gonna add a transform right here. And for the rotation, I'm just gonna click here, pull out and add a Perlin noise 3. Still doesn't do anything. I'm gonna override the time by adding a time. Now the range needs to be higher. But this looks kind of stupid, so I'm gonna turn this down to 0.1, maybe 0.2 or 3, still too high. I think 0.2 looks fine. Turn down the octaves to 1 or 2 to get a more continuous movement. So yeah, this is the final scene. I hope you liked the video. I hope you could follow if you were trying to follow, and if you need help or if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments. And I've already prepared some other scenes for other videos, so if you're interested, you can subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I hope you had fun. See you soon.